Welcome back, everyone, to Joshua's Magic. I have a very special guest today, Kathy Newburn, longtime student of the Ageless Wisdom, particularly Alice Bailey books, and she's got quite a focus and, if I may say so myself, a good bit of knowledge on esoteric astrology, and also an author. And she's here to talk to me today about Wesak and whatever other interesting stuff comes up in our conversation. How are you doing today, Kathy?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Joshua.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for coming on. So this Wesak Festival, what's it all about?
Good question. Well, first, I guess we should say that it's coming up on Thursday. So this Thursday. So now, today is Monday, so we're preparing in our consciousness because it's part of a monthly cycle of observation and participation energetically in what's called the full moon approach to the hierarchy. So Thursday is when the full moon occurs, and that's the time of heightened spiritual opportunity each month, the full moon is. But at this particular time, when the sun is in the sign of Taurus, it's known as one of the highest points of the spiritual year, the Wesak Festival, as I said. It's celebrated by many Buddhists throughout the world because the Buddha himself was said to have been born in the sign of Taurus, achieved his enlightenment at the Taurus full moon, and also to have died in that sign. And so it's celebrated, as I said, by many, many people throughout the world. But this observation that many in the West are starting to participate in is not so much a commemoration of the Buddha of antiquity, but instead a united participation with the living Buddha, the Buddha who we're told returns to Earth, returns to our planet from a distant place every year at the exact time of the Wesak full moon. In fact, it's the 8 minutes prior to the exact time of the Wesak full moon, he makes an approach from the center where he resides in his etheric body, which is the center Shambhala, the highest center of spiritual will on the planet. So he comes, we're told, at great sacrifice. And a friend recently asked me, what is the sacrifice? And so I thought, well, it's a good question. Maybe others would think of it too. The sacrifice for the great lords when they approach humanity from their secret places is that they're not accustomed at all to the coarseness of our vibration, which, as you could understand, in comparison to their own enlightened vibration, we present a vibration that is actually painful and so disturbing to them that, for example, someone such as the Buddha, he comes at great cost to himself, great sacrifice, to just withstand for that brief blessing that he confers upon the world. It's a challenge.
Yeah, maybe it's kind of like going back to the job you had 25 years ago. You know, like, would you want to do that? Or
Yeah.
500 years ago?
Going back to the planet 500 years ago. I mean, we might say some things were better. I would think some things were better in those days, but the majority, the vibration was definitely lower in a certain sense, you know. So,
But he's moved beyond that sphere is the idea, you know. And now coming back, it's like, oh, I got to deal with this again. Something like that, who knows?
it's only for a brief 8 minutes and then he gets to return. So Wesak is a time when we have to prepare for the intensity of the vibration that we receive, because although it's only for 8 minutes, it's the most potent vibration is released on us at that time. And so we who celebrate this event, we know that we have to prepare for it. And so that's what these days are. They're days of preparation.
Yeah, I wasn't really aware of the Wesak Festival until, you know, maybe a year ago or something like that.
Yeah.
And I noticed last year that my experience was pretty powerful of it. I mean, I didn't even sort of put it together like this sort of powerful stuff happening was in the lead up to that and connected with that at the time. But I wonder, do you think it makes a difference of people being like consciously aware of it? Because I don't really remember like, oh, you know, during this time I've had all these powerful experiences before that, you know.
Yeah, I definitely think that conscious preparation and conscious participation definitely augment our ability to partake of the energies available. Yeah.
Because the idea is that he's bringing down this higher energy
Yes.
from Shambhala and giving it out to the Brotherhood of Light, the spiritual hierarchy, the Masters of Wisdom,
Right.
who are gathered there, and they have to be gathered in a group because they can't even receive it by themselves individually, right? Isn't that part of it?
And
Yeah.
so that's an important point for us to remember because, especially in this time of um, self-isolation and such, we might consider ourselves making an approach to this great festival or linking with this great festival in an individual way. But like you just mentioned, even the masters of the wisdom who are gathered in a valley in Tibet, a hidden valley called Vesaka or Wesak Valley. That's why this is called the Wesak Festival, because that's where the Buddha goes, to that valley in his etheric body. He's not taking a hike. he's actually coming in his etheric body. And yes, as you said, the masters of the wisdom have to be in group formation. And we're told that members of the surrounding area who are pilgrims seeking the light, seekers on the path, who live in the area, they know of this festival. And if they're at a high enough level of consciousness, I guess, are permitted entry. Um, we don't really know how it works, but we are told that members from all parts of the world, people from all parts of the world, participate in this event in their etheric bodies or in their dream states. In fact, Alice Bailey, who wrote the books that are published by Lucis Trust and that many of us are studying, Alice Bailey, the author of those books, relayed a dream experience that she had, I believe it was twice at 7-year intervals, wherein she saw vividly an account of herself participating in her dream state of this ceremony, this fantastic ceremony that's going on in the Wesak Valley. And then over the course of her life, she met many other people who had exactly had the same experience. And maybe some of your listeners today have had that experience,
Yeah,
but
put it in the comments.
they didn't know what it was, you
Yeah.
know? I've met people who've had the experience. And so, yeah, we can participate, but even if we don't, it's not the important thing to have the experience or not. It's to just be consciously aware that this is a time of powerful influx of spiritual energies, those particularly those 8 minutes. If you can make the effort to link up at that time, which I unfortunately forgot to check the exact time. I think it might be around 6:30 in the morning, New York time.
I think it's like 6:45, 6:44.
So if you start
Um,
waking up before that and then hold that alignment right at the time of the full moon,
so is
you,
it the 8 minutes leading up to that time of the full moon? Yeah.
yeah, you're helping to create a large channel through which these energies can pour and be released into human consciousness. So, but as I was trying to say, make sure that you link up with the group, not only the group that's meeting in the Wesak Valley, but all the other people, because there are thousands and thousands of people all over the world in the West now who are participating in this event.
And this year is kind of interesting because it coincides with taking place right after the festival week of the new group of world servers, which was
That's,
in December of the end of last year.
that's right. That's a really powerful augmentation of the energies of not only the Wesak full moon, but also the previous month's full moon, the Aries full moon, and the subsequent Gemini full moon. All three are exponentially heightened, but I would say particularly so this Wesak festival because it's occurs in an earth sign. Capricorn also is an earth sign. There's just a really strong link between the new group of world servers who are ruled by, we're told, by the energy of Taurus, with the festival week, which is the festival week celebrating this group. And so this year's festival week was particularly powerful. It was associated with some powerful astrological alignments. And therefore, this festival week being followed now by the Wesak Festival is supercharged. So we have to be careful. People don't often like to talk about the risks involved in placing yourself on a spiritual path, but I think that's something that we really need to take into consideration, because
Yeah.
we can become overstimulated by taking in too much energy, and then that causes all kinds of problems. So we need to be careful.
There's got to be some know thyself going on. You know, if you feel like it's getting too much, you know, don't turn on the gas. You know, pump the brakes.
Right. That's totally true.
But I think you know, thinking on what you're saying, sort of the distributive aspect of it, like this energy is coming from Shambhala, being given by the Buddha and poured out to the spiritual hierarchy, who's then distributing it to their disciples, and the disciples to the new group of world servers, and you know, it sort of spreads throughout the world like that.
Yeah.
And I guess the whole conscious thing, it occurs to me, like if you can consciously be a part of it, you can help bring down that energy to uplift society and humanity. So I think
Right.
that's sort of a real service. And
Right.
yeah, something we've talked about a little bit is like, I don't know if we talked about it, but maybe similar reading anyway, is like the idea of service. Like you think of like going to a homeless shelter or like physical things as service, I feel like a lot of the time. But this idea of like occult or metaphysical service is potentially more powerful than that. Like if you know, could bring down energy which inspires other people to sort of the physical service that we more commonly think of, that's an enormous benefit. You know, you going to a soup kitchen personally might not be as valuable as, you know, prayer, fasting, or evocative activity, which brings down energy, which inspires, you know, 10 other people to go to a soup kitchen.
Exactly. Exactly what you're saying is true. We all have a different dharma, you know, we all have a different way of serving. But one of the most powerful services that we can express is radiation of spiritual energy through our etheric vehicles, through our ability to align with our soul and then bring through those higher energies.
Yeah, like somebody at a soup kitchen might be, the real service they're rendering might be that radiation versus, you know, handing out the bread or whatever.
Right. So yeah, it doesn't mean that we can't do those practical things in the world. The underlying radiatory effect of whatever we're doing is the real service. As you move more and more
Yeah.
further ahead on the spiritual path, it's more about who you are rather than what you do.
Yeah, it's like what's the next step for you? Is the next step like the radiation thing, or maybe just being disciplined at, you know, helping people, or in a normal way? You know, you gotta, like you were saying about the energy, you know, it's, you know, something that's too much or too high for one person is just right, and vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah, we all have different ways of serving, but there is one consideration that the Tibetan gives in regards to service, which I always found helpful. He said that you need discrimination when you're trying to figure out what it is that you want to dedicate your life to. And if you're seriously on a spiritual path, not so there are not so many people, relatively speaking, who are on that path. And so sometimes I think, and the Tibetans said, that you should serve in relationship to that most intense interest of yours, rather than going out and doing something that many, many people could do. You have to find what it is that you can do with your abilities, because there are much fewer people able to do what is called spiritual work. You know, so it just depends. You know, we all have to make a living, and so it might not be possible to dedicate yourself fully to a path of spiritual service. But if you set your intention and you strive to keep moving forward through daily practice of meditation and mind control, you will probably find that eventually doors will open to you and you can do what your soul put you here to do. So
Just to clarify, I assume you mean controlling your own mind, right?
yeah,
Because I've always heard people just say mind control, and that's what they mean, but it sounds like, you know, the MK Ultra stuff or whatever.
big brother.
Yeah. Yeah, you can get swept up in ideas that are out there in the world of like this is how you should be or this is how things are, and then lose track of who you are and what you can actually bring to things by trying to live up to something or imitate somebody else's uh,
Yeah,
capacity.
we're all very, very unique people, and we all have a particular dharma, and we can, you know, easily go through our lives assuming responsibilities that would be better left to someone else.
Yeah, and then they're not learning the lesson by dealing with those things because you're dealing with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you think you're helping them, but you're like taking their ability to grow away from them,
Yeah.
theoretically.
And oftentimes there will be obstacles, as we all know, in the path of spiritual development. Many people tend to think when they place themselves on a spiritual path that it's their whole life will become free of problems now.
If only.
We're sailing ahead, no more obstacles because I'm on the path. I see the light and things will get better. And they become very disillusioned when that doesn't happen right away.
Yeah,
And that instead, every turn, another challenge. Because we have to understand that our personality, our lower self, is pitted, like in a battle, they say, with our soul. And that personality has had control of our lower self, our personality, for millions of lives. And so if you think about it, when that little baby is losing control to his little brother that was just born, that little baby is not very happy. So that little brother, we could say our little spark of soul that's coming to birth within us, is really looking for expression, but oftentimes is blocked by the little tantrums that the personality is throwing up all the time. And so many people place themselves on a path, and then when things get difficult, they immediately give up. Whereas the clearest and most powerful thing you can do, in my view, is that when things get rough, you keep going and you keep doing your daily practice, and you keep working with your thoughts and your studies, because then you demonstrate to your higher self that you're serious, and that you're ready, no
yeah,
matter how feeble your efforts might feel, and they will feel quite feeble during those challenging times in life, like many people are passing through right now with no income. That's a challenge.
yeah,
Can't deny that's a challenge. But this time will give you an opportunity to dedicate yourself more fully to a path of inner growth. And that might be one of the lessons we need to learn despite the outer challenges. So it's really just to say, if you do that, even if it's a 5-minute meditation, you can't do any more than that. You're living in a place with 10 people, you can take 5 minutes somewhere, somehow, getting up early, going to bed late. You can do it, and just do that, and you'll be placing your footsteps more firmly upon the path.
yeah. I've noticed some stuff recently, like not, fortunately, I still have a job, so it's not the financial stuff, but some other things that have been difficult for me, and just how it sort of either causes you or maybe more accurately gives you an opportunity to reflect on what might need to be changed or fixed within you.
Yeah,
Instead of thinking, oh, it's all just going to happen out there,
yeah,
instead of the real journey being the changes in here, which later reflect themselves out there.
yeah, yeah. There's always going to be obstacles. I mean, look at what the Christ went through in his
Yeah.
life. I mean, look at, anytime we think we have challenges, just look at that, the lives of the great saints and great initiates throughout time.
Yeah, and he thought, I think he said towards the end how I would have gathered you together, O Israel, like hens or something, but you would not. And I think he came there with this idea that he was gonna manifest the kingdom of God at that time. The
Yeah,
what we you have called today the externalization of the spiritual hierarchy. But he thought it was going to happen,
Yeah.
and it became revealed to him sort of towards the end that no, the time wasn't right, or it wasn't, and he had to let go of that, and he had to,
What a huge thing that must have been,
what's that?
What a huge thing that must have been, that realization that humanity wasn't ready. But now they say humanity is ready. So that's another thing we wanted to discuss, is the importance of this time in planetary history. Because we're at the dawning of a new age, as many of you probably know. We're leaving 2160 or so years of the age of Pisces, and now we're in the threshold to this new Aquarian age. And generally speaking, they say that an avatar, a world teacher, steps forward at the beginning of each age to inaugurate the age and to anchor the new civilization. And generally speaking, it's a different avatar each time. And I don't fully understand, but the main reason is what you said, that Christ, who was the avatar of the Piscean age, realized pretty during that lifetime that it was not able to fulfill his mission. And so since it was aborted, I assume that's one of the main reasons why he's coming again to inaugurate the age of Aquarius.
Well,
So,
I don't know that it was a failure. The way I sort of look at it, and I'm not sure if the Christ knew it or it was Jesus not knowing it or whatever. But whatever the case, I feel like whether it was the Christ who really knew it wasn't possible, or if it was the Father in heaven, the Ancient of Days, that knew,
yeah.
the real mission was what he did. But his idea of it at the outset was, oh, I'm going to make this happen, instead of I'm going to start to make this happen, and then eventually I'll be able to finish it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know that he said that he realized that humanity, it wasn't so much his failure, of course.
No, yeah.
Humanity wasn't ready
Yeah.
to be developed to receive the message he came to give.
There weren't enough people with enough light, with their consciousness high enough.
Yeah. So now he comes again at this higher turn of the spiral, and the prediction is that this time his mission will be accomplished, and he will be able to, with humanity's help, move the whole vibration of the planet to a higher level. So we're entering into the threshold of a truly expansive time. Not to say there won't be challenges, not to say there won't be obstacles to all of this.
Well, that's even what it says in the Bible, isn't it? Like the coming of wars and rumors of war and similar things to that. So
yeah, yeah,
externalization of the hierarchy. I mean, that it's sort of like the Wesak thing is sort of the principle of externalization.
mm-hmm.
This energy from Shambhala is coming down to one level, and then it's being distributed to this other level, and then from there being even more widely distributed. And that's sort of the externalization process, the process of white magic, of you taking this thing from a high level and stepping it down, and then bringing it down again until each level is able to hold that vibration or bring it down into grounding.
Exactly. Humanity itself is said to be the planetary messenger. So that's exactly what we do. We collectively form what we call a bridge in consciousness that connects us to the higher realms, to the spiritual realms. And then through us, through our collective bridge, the energies are released into the three lower kingdoms, and the vibration is affecting not only our fellow human beings, but also the animal, vegetables, and mineral worlds. All are affected by this vibration, and all are being lifted to a higher level. So it's a great process of a chain. Sometimes we call it the chain of hierarchy, which extends from outside of our system. We're all connected. There are forces at play that are pouring in, that are from outside of our solar system. They pour in through the sun. They pour in through certain planets. Then they pour in through the kingdoms in nature, and through us, and then to the whole planet. So it's really a wonderful chain. Right now it's at 7 o'clock. I know, because everybody everybody out there is clapping for the healthcare workers and all the workers in the stores and everything.
Well, let's join them, Kathy. Let's give a clap for the healthcare workers.
Yes, wonderful what they're doing.
Yeah, hopefully, things keep getting better with the coronavirus situation as it is now.
Yes. Let's hope.
Another challenge that has to be faced on the path humanity faces.
Yes.
So you sort of hinted at the rays a little bit there. It's coming into our system through extra systemic sources. And the idea is that there's these 7 rays that all color everything, and there's sort of different qualities to each of them.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the main teachings in the Alice Bailey books. Wouldn't you agree?
It is.
And something you said earlier about the conflict between the personality and the soul. Someplace Jawal Kul, the Tibetan, mentions that it is very instructive to know what your soul ray is and your personality ray, because if you understand that, it really sets up what the conflict there is. Like if your personality ray is on the 2nd ray of love, wisdom, and your soul ray is on the 4th ray of harmony through conflict, you might be used to being like, oh, this conflict stuff is just something I need to get away from, and I just need to be sort of serene and in love and touchy-feely. But maybe it's the reverse, that you have to deal with this conflict on your soul ray to get to true harmony, or whatever the ray makeup is. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, as you said, that is the goal, to come more fully under the influence of our soul ray. But the challenge for us is to understand, how do we determine what these rays are? That's the challenge. And so we're really only working at this stage in our evolution with hypotheses. So as you said, the Bailey teachings bring out a lot of information about the rays. There's 5 full volumes that are thick volumes of information. And then throughout all the rest of the books, the 21 other books, 15 or so other books, there is also a lot of information about the rays. So it's really a process of getting familiar with what the different types are. And then you can start to, perhaps over a period of time, come to some generalizations or hypotheses about what your rays might be. And yeah, like you said, it's difficult to know, is what I'm seeing, which is considered a challenge for me, is that purely a personality issue, or is it perhaps an issue that's being set up by the soul in conjunction with the personality? So there's different types of crises, and we really don't fully know whether whatever we're going through is our soul is trying to come through and trying to push us to be, for example, more appropriating more of the will, or is that will out energy, which is a very powerful, it's called the 1st ray, is the ray of will or power. Is that something that's more conditioning us at personality level? And are we supposed to temper that? How do we know when we are supposed to gather more towards one aspect of ourselves and more towards the other? We might be strengthening something that's about personality. So it's a fine tuning, and eventually in the future, it's going to be one of the primary aspects of the new and coming psychology, the study of the rays and the study of esoteric astrology. They are going to be the primary tools that psychologists will use in the future to bring in the soul aspect of a person, rather than today, as it stands, primarily psychologists or many psychologists are just primarily using the psychoanalytic tools of going over your parental issues or your psychological complexes.
Your parental constellations.
Yeah. The types of things that are holding you back, whereas the Tibetan has said that the new astrology, the new psychology, will incorporate tools that will be intended to focus on strengthening the higher aspects of yourself, your soul nature. Mm-hmm. Of course, focusing on some of this the obstacles which come through the chart and which come through the rays, but that's not the primary focus. The primary focus will be working to bring in the soul.
So we've touched a little bit on the rays, but you're really an expert, if I might say so, on esoteric astrology. Let's. How many people even know about esoteric astrology? So compared to the rest of
Speaking, there's about 10 people who know, but there's very few people who take the time to study it because it's very challenging. Even people who read the Bailey books, many of them have no interest or no understanding of astrology. And although it's not a necessary prerequisite to study esoteric astrology, if you really want to use it as a tool, it would definitely help to have some understanding of traditional astrology. So that combination, it's a very abstract, very...
Well, for people that might not know, what is esoteric astrology? I assume everybody has a sort of a general idea of what astrology is. But how does that differ from esoteric astrology? What is esoteric astrology compared to regular astrology?
Well, people today who are astrologers think that astrology is a few thousand years old, whereas esoteric astrology would say it's ageless. It's always existed, as far as we know. It's the oldest, listen to that, it's the oldest and greatest of sciences. And we're not talking about time as we know it on this planet. We're not talking about just this planet. The ageless wisdom exists throughout the entire universe. So it's an ancient, ancient science. So it predates any of the ancient systems of astrology that are now coming into vogue with the Project Hindsight and the Hellenistic, all the good work and very interesting work of ancient astrology. But this predates it all.
But so this is sort of something that's never really been something humanity's known about, right? Isn't that sort of the idea?
The initiates have always known about it.
Yeah, but there's people sort of like bridging the gap between humanity and the spiritual hierarchy.
Yeah, so this is the time the Tibetan Masters is said to be one of the greatest astrologers of the spiritual hierarchy of our planet. And the books that he gave forward through Alice Bailey are books that he wrote in cooperation with the entire hierarchy. He's the messenger. He's like the
Hermes.
The Mercury of the spiritual hierarchy. So he's giving information from the other teachers who he has learned from. So it's not his information. He's just the bridge, the vehicle.
So is it just that esoteric astrology is more accurate, but it's the same thing as regular astrology, or are there other important differences between the two?
Well, there's many differences, and it is.
Like, would you go in and be like, "Hey, do my chart with esoteric astrology and tell me if I'm going to make money this year or whatever," or what would be the purpose of esoteric astrology?
Used in the same way, but of course, most of us who practice astrology at this time, we are what you would call bridging between the more psychological approach to astrology, which developed in the last century, and this new teaching. So we're trying to bridge between the two, because the Tibetan does encourage people to try and work with his hypotheses that he's brought forward. Hypotheses to us, not hypotheses to him, but we have to prove their veracity through our ability to work with them. So most people today that I know are bridging astrologers, I would say. So we do still use the tools of psychological astrology primarily, but I'm personally interested in Hellenistic astrology and some of the techniques that they use. But yeah, so it's a bridge now. We're just tiptoeing into being able to manifest it. But the Tibetan predicts that there will be new ways of working with horoscopes, new horoscopes that will be developed. One that I've been interested in is the prenatal chart, how to work with that. And quite a number of people are interested in prenatal charts. But yeah, so there's many differences. It's much more related to bringing in the whole subject of the rays, which is not touched upon in regular astrology today. There's no understanding of that. So astrology and the rays work, as I said, very much together. The rays come through all the signs, come through all the planets, and give a coloring that is, in many cases, very different than what you would normally associate with a particular zodiacal or planetary energy. So it's quite different. And then for each planet, for any of you who know a little bit about astrology, you'll know that in the astrology that most people practice today, there's one ruler for each sign. In esoteric astrology, there's 3 rulers for each sign. The traditional ruler, we still use that, but there's 2 other rulers that people are influenced by or conditioned by to the extent that they're moving forward on the spiritual path. For someone who's not at all a spiritual seeker or not at all dedicated to service, they're not going to come under the influence of these 2 higher rulers, planetary rulers. But if they are on a path of spiritual development, then you have to blend all 3 rulers, or mostly 2 rulers, the esoteric and the exoteric ruler. You blend them and they influence us in very different ways. So it's, and then there are, through the constellations, ray energies pour on a higher level. And that conditions a person, again, as they move forward on the path. It's a very complex study, but there's also a need to make it synthetic and to be able to communicate in a way that doesn't confuse people. Because I think that's one of the challenges of all astrology, is to, as the Tibetan says, to not see the forest for the trees. You know, we get so caught up in all of the details that are readily available in any chart, and does that really help a client to come to a deeper understanding of their soul purpose? And that's really what esoteric astrology is primarily about.
Yeah, and I think he says that you really have to use the intuition in esoteric astrology to sort of decipher it. You know, you just give them a bunch of facts. That's maybe not where it's at.
But the book itself doesn't tell you how to analyze a chart. It really doesn't. It just gives a lot of hints about very abstract things. And the Tibetan says that, he says, you might wonder what the purpose of my giving you all these seemingly strange abstractions might be. And he says it's to widen the contours of your mind. And as you do so, then the bridge, the inner bridge to the intuition becomes more powerfully built, and you can therefore become more receptive to impressions from your higher self, and therefore can learn to help another person in a deeper way, I would say.
Did you, we talked about before, you wanted to go into some specific astrological things a little bit?
Well, there's many things to say, but we could just say that, for example, at this time, the energy of Taurus is powerfully conditioning, and that energy is overshadowed by the 4th ray, one of the 7 rays that you mentioned, the ray of harmony through conflict. So it's quite a different energy than you might expect pouring through Taurus, which is usually considered a very mellow, lackadaisical kind of, let's not worry about tomorrow, let's focus on today kind of sign. Mm-hmm. But in the esoteric traditions, the ray of harmony through conflict gives the Taurian person and the Taurian festival a different kind of quality. It's a warlike energy in a lot of ways, you know, but it's also a ray of harmony. So there's a challenge during this period of, for example, taking in too much energy, because it's a very powerful influx of the will. You know, the will is very strong at this festival. And in esoteric astrology, for example, the exoteric ruler that we all know is Venus. So it does give that love of beauty, love of ease, love of the present moment. But on the higher levels, it's ruled by Vulcan, which is the synthetic 1st ray planet. So there's a charge of will energy that comes through at this festival that traditional astrology would tend to overlook. So that's just an example of the kind of energies. But we also know that there are extra systemic forces pouring through Taurus, which are related to enlightenment. It's called the forces of enlightenment. And these are, I believe, first ray in nature as well. So there's a real, as I said, a real charge and a real need for the Taurian person to control their temper. That's what the Tibetan says, you know, a very mellow sign in many ways, but there's another side to Taurus. And I think it's mostly related to their inability to regulate the powerful will energy that can pull through. So those are some of the ideas. There's many.
But this does seem to be a sort of fourth ray thing, like very mellow or very angry. You know, it's like this polarization, this dichotomy between harmony and conflict.
Yeah, yeah.
You find that point of synthesis for true harmony, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. The Tibetan says that conflict is not a bad thing. You know, particularly if it's between the soul and personality, because it's going to be giving you an opportunity. If you have that, if you're on that Scorpio Taurus axis, that's the primary fourth ray axis. It's an axis of challenge. Many crises will come when you're strongly under that axis, but it's also a tremendous opportunity for spiritual growth if you can maneuver successfully through the challenges of the fourth ray. Because the Tibetan says, you know, we look at war and peace as the opposites. And he says, actually, we shouldn't be striving for peace. We should be striving for change, which is the true opposite of peace. And I think that relates very much to the fourth ray. So it's not a matter of not wanting to experience the warring forces within yourself. Those warring forces are your biggest opportunity, providing you the biggest opportunity to change. And so he says, peace and change are the true opposites, and that war is a subset of change. And so we're not really supposed to be focusing on peace, although it is on a higher level, of course, a valued need. On another level, it's if we focus on peace, we're going to stay more or less who we are. We're not going to be moving forward, so we have to focus on change.
That's an interesting way to put it, the perspective there.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Change.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of warring forces, because they're an aspect of change. And how do we deal with them in a way that we can maintain our footing and not lose ourselves in emotional distortions, but not suppress it? Because I think a lot of us as spiritual seekers, we try our best to suppress the warring aspects within ourselves, when we need to really, as the Scorpio labor of Hercules says, lift them up into the light.
Where he lifts the Hydra off of the ground, and that's how he beats it.
Don't suppress it. Lift.
Well, I feel like conflicts really are just, it's not like something new. It's more like the inherent contradictions or conflicts within people or nations or humanity are just getting exposed.
Yeah.
You know, we act like the conflict's new, but the conflict was always, you know, there on some level. It's just that they're coming into expression, or, you know, being dug up, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we live on a planet that's, at least at the level of humanity, our whole human kingdom is ruled at the soul level by this fourth ray. So conflict, harmony through conflict, is our way as a human kingdom of progressing forward into the light. And so the rays cycle in and out of manifestation. They're not, all 7 rays are not always really powerfully conditioning at any one time in planetary history. So for a few hundred years or so, the fourth ray hasn't been strongly conditioning. And that's why the Tibetan has said we don't have really any tremendously great art at this time. There's a lot of experiment, but the true...
Careful what you say, somebody's going to get offended.
I know,
what about this thing?
I'm not trying to offend anyone. There's a lot of great experimentation, but the true genius that will be expressed through art is not until this fourth ray begins to come more fully into manifestation, which it's just starting to come into a cycle of manifestation. So during this Aquarian age, there will be tremendous movements forward in the creation of true beauty in many ways. So it's something to look forward to. And the number one beauty that will be under this fourth ray is the expression of beauty through creativity in the daily life, the way we live. You know, not so much what we create, although that will be part of it, but we're going to be able, and our world will support us in living under the influence of our soul and creating through soul impressions, because we'll be more focused on that than on working.
Well, the work, I guess, will be more harmonious rather than work.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll be creating through our work.
It's interesting. No, go ahead. I was just going to say, it's interesting how sort of the theme of the conversation is sort of trended towards the fourth ray, and now we're just on this sort of fourth ray path right now.
I tend to think about the fourth ray a lot. It's probably redundant because people probably get tired of me talking about the fourth ray, but yeah, I'm very interested in it, and we don't know, but it's on the horizon. So we haven't lived in a fourth ray influence much in our lives. But if you look back to the Renaissance in Italy, a fourth ray country, because the countries all have rays, during the time of Leonardo and the great masters, Raphael, Michelangelo, that was another fourth ray time. And just think of the wonders of that age. And Germany, another country that has fourth ray, and the great musicians that worked through that land to bring forward such
Bach, Wagner, all those great classical artists.
But now we're sort of moving into the new forms, you know, the art and the music of the past. While beautiful, it doesn't necessarily serve us at this time, and we're moving into a new manifestation of art, which will unfold gradually.
Just imagine in, 300 years, 500 years, whatever in the future, looking back of like the masterpiece TV shows of the time in the early part of the 2000s.
Yeah, the Tibetan says that people in the future, and I don't think he means the too distant future, will look back at this time in planetary history as with disbelief. They will not believe how we sunk to the level of materialism that we've sunk to. Is that the word sunk? I don't know, sunk to. But anyway, yeah, it's going to be known as like a dark age. And so, yeah, it's a challenging time we're living in.
Well, we're on the way up, hopefully. I think that's the idea, so.
Yes.
So speaking of going up and coming down, I might do this with my future interviews, but I have this idea. Using the intuition, what, if anything, what message or idea would you put out there to the audience today? What occurs to you as a parting thought or a series of thoughts to bring up?
About anything or about
anything, wherever your intuition takes you.
To be hopeful in a time of challenge, time of a lot of darkness, to recognize that there's so much light and so much goodwill, and to focus on that, and to believe that a new life is possible. And so I just end with a beautiful quote from the Bhagavad Gita, which the Tibetan uses in the reappearance of the Christ. Whenever there's a withering of the law and an uprising of lawlessness on all sides, then I manifest myself for the salvation of the righteous and the destruction of those that do evil. I come to birth age after age. So what we're experiencing now is the birth pangs of a new age. And birth pangs are painful, very painful. But a new world is coming, and we can hear the birds singing. We can see the first rays of the sun piercing through the clouds. And so we have to keep our chins up and be hopeful and optimistic.
Thank you, Kathy. It's very interesting. As you're saying this, I'm noticing more of this sort of this theme or this pattern throughout the conversation. as if this interview was on a certain ray, probably the fourth ray. It seems like
Perhaps.
this sort of theme of like conflict and overstimulation and this and that and finding your way through it to the other side.
Yeah, you're probably right. Well, thanks
Anyway,
for the opportunity to chat with you.
yeah, it's been great having you on. Yeah, I'll have to think about this thought more of. There's always something that comes out of conversations or meetings. You can sort of see sort of something esoteric reflected in them if they go on long enough. Yeah.
Or even if they're short.
Yeah, sometimes they're short, but when you can really get in there a while, then it starts to become clear. But
Yeah.
do you have any projects or things you want to promote before we head out?
Not really. No, not really.
Okay. Well, if she tells me something later, you'll find it in the description down here to check.
Okay. All right. Well,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thanks a lot, Kathy, and bye-bye, everyone. Hit the like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell if you want more interesting interviews like this one.
All right. Bye.